So I got this barn. And in my barn, I have cages where I keep humans. And some of these humans I have working for 23 cents an hour. And the ones who can't work just sit there. And if they want to call their families, they get a phone call a week for about 15 minutes. And that costs about $5. For those who work, that means about 20 hours of work to make that phone call. Sometimes I let them visit family members, but they're not allowed to touch them. If they get sick, I give them Tylenol. But if they get real sick, they get the bare minimum medical treatment to keep them alive. Sometimes I let them stab each other. Don't provide them any education. And if they misbehave, I stick them in a room by themselves for 23 hours a day and let them out for maybe an hour to see the sunlight, take a shower. And I make money off of them too. I get the state to pay me hundreds of thousands of dollars, actually $20,000 a year, to keep these people in cages. And so I'm making money hand over fist in my barn. If that were true, you'd want to put me in a cage. But that's one of the problems I'm here to talk about today, is this problem of human caging. What's the magnitude of this problem? Well, when I was born, there were about 260,000 people in cages. 40 years later, there are now 2.2 million people in cages. Now, there was not a huge crime wave. There was not a sudden idea in the American mind to suddenly go commit crimes and get put in cages. In fact, the rate of violent crime dropped over the course of those years. And what happened was, we turned things into crime that ain't crime. Things like drug addiction, poverty, things like driving without a license, and littering, and urinating in public. And at the same time we criminalized more crimes, we also increased the length of time people did for those crimes. And we created 3 strikes laws. So if you had drugs 3 times, then you do 20, 30 years. At the same time, we targeted people of color to fill up our cages. Although people of color make up 37% of our population, they compose 67% of our humans in cages. I'll give you an example. If the Durham police were sitting around trying to figure out where they are going to set up an undercover buy, where they're going to go do a drug sale to try to get somebody arrested for drugs, they'd probably be over here in East Durham. They would not go to Duke, where there are drugs, and set Duke students up for undercover buys. In fact, if a Duke student's found with drugs, they are referred internally, which is a euphemism for they don't go to court, because they know that the cost to individuals charged with crimes is catastrophic. It inflicts a permanent disability. Can't get a job. If you go to jail, what happens to my job? Then I lose my housing. What happens to my kids? All kinds of costs that we don't measure. We do measure the cost of the $20,000 or $30,000 they're paying me to keep them in my barn, but they do not measure the collateral consequences of having 2.2 million people in jail and what that means to their family. Jail does not work as a way of solving our problems. One of the problems with jail is that it's downstream from other systems of care. Systems like education. They got this problem about suspending and expelling children from school. A lot of smart people trying to figure out, how do we keep kids in school? Because the studies show that if people are removed from school, their likelihood they will end up in the cage increases exponentially. There's a lot of hand wringing, a lot of smart people. How do we keep our kids in school? I figured it out. Don't kick them out. Also in my cages are people who need mental health treatment, people who are sick. We disassembled our mental health providing system. We stopped funding it, and now we look to our jails to help people with mental illness and addiction. I got a solution to that one: provide mental health. We got a housing problem. People can't make a living on minimum wage. Housing prices are going up. So people are pushed to homelessness or living in places that are not safe or healthy. And when those things combine, and people lose their housing, or they're kicked out of school, or they're not treated for the illnesses they have, then they end up in my barn. One of the things I can't do when I sleep at night, I look at the jail list, Durham County Jail, and I make a list of the people who probably shouldn't be in jail. Like Reginald in our Durham County Jail for littering. Michael in jail for begging. Teresa, Charles, Joshua, Robert, Lena for driving my license revoked. I saw Greg, and I know Greg because I used to represent Greg. I had this phase where I was representing all the panhandlers in Durham. And Greg, I met him when he was yanked out of a car that he was sleeping in Harris Teeter parking lot, and they broke his arm, the police did. And I went down to Duke Hospital to visit Greg, and I was all worried, Greg's gonna be angry and hurt, and he was like living high. Like, I got the pillow, I got the food, you can walk out, give me a cigarette. But that's not how Greg deserves to be treated. So I saw Greg's name on the list before I came over here, and he's been in jail for 20 days for having a shopping cart from Target. And he rolled it out from Target at his corner to keep his stuff in 20 days. Jerome's in jail for intoxicated and disruptive. That also would describe many of our friends over at Duke. Emil spent 3 days for shoplifting. That means Emil didn't even get out of the shop with the stuff Emil was trying to take. And Mary spent 12 days for possession of drug paraphernalia, which meant they didn't even find drugs. They just found, a pipe. So this is how we're using jail here in Durham. And what I'm here to do is to try to ask you to reimagine justice. What would justice look like? What would it be like if all those people were your people? If that was your sister and your brother and your mom and your dad? What would happen if you cared for them the way you care for your own? What would justice look like? We got a glimpse of that here in Durham when a young man had a gun out in his apartment and it accidentally went off and shot a young woman below, a girl, a child. And ordinarily our system asks two questions: who done it, and how much do we punish that person? Crime and punishment, hammer and nail. But when all we have are hammers, everything looks like a nail. And so what would have happened to him is that he would have gone to jail for a very long time. But folks here in Durham are working on restorative justice, which is a fancy word for an old idea about being together in community and resolving our conflicts together. And so that process asks different questions. It asks the question, how have you been harmed? What can we do to help you, person who's been harmed? When the victim shows up in court, they're there to testify for the state. Many times that never happens, and no one sits down and asks the person who's been harmed, how have you been harmed? And then it asks the question to the person who caused the harm, why did you do what you do? Why did you do that? What things in your life pointed you in the direction of doing that harm that you caused? And can you accept responsibility for that harm and meet that person and talk to them about it? And the third thing it asks is of the community. How is the community harmed? And what can the community do to heal that harm? And how can the community participate in that process? And what happened was groups of people went to the person who was harmed and their family and talked to them about how they were hurt. Groups of people went to the person who caused the harm and asked those questions. Why'd you do it? How'd it happen? The community came together and they had a circle process in which what they resolved was this person should not go to jail. This person should make toys for kids in waiting rooms. This person should go talk about gun safety to communities. This person should not go to jail. This person's not disposable. They do not belong in a human cage in my barn. And so, if we imagine justice that way, it really is about being in community with each other and treating our conflicts as an opportunity for us to learn more about each other and to strengthen the ties that connect us and not dispose of people because of the single worst mistake they've made. It reminds me of a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King where he was talking about justice. And he said, "Power without love is abusive and reckless." He said, "Love without power is anemic and sentimental." He said, "Power at its best is justice, implementing the demands of love. And justice at its best is power, correcting everything that stands against love." And by defining justice in terms of how we use power to become a more whole community, that's how we reimagine justice. And so what can you do? Find a circle. At every stage of our broken society, in the criminal justice system, in housing, in education, in healthcare, at every stage, there is a more humane way to treat our brothers and sisters. And it's being in community. It's being in circles. Even before someone's arrested, they could be sent to a circle to talk about the thing that they committed. And even after they're arrested, before they're charged and plead guilty or not guilty, they could have a circle. And if they're found guilty and it's time for sentencing, instead of hammer and nail, we could have a circle. Even in prison, we could run our prisons based on circles. And if there's an infraction, a detention officer could sit down in community with that prisoner and they could talk and learn about each other. And when coming home out of prison, these folks who have been permanently disabled by the collateral consequences of our criminal justice system, we can give them circles of support. So when they have to go to court and get their traffic ticket fixed, when they have to have somebody watch their kid while they go try to get a job or need a ride to an interview, then they have community around them and they are not isolated by that permanent disability. And so, sitting here in Durham, knowing we have these humans in cages, I want you to feel the real urgency of that. I want you to feel the human catastrophe of solitary confinement. We have children in youth homes in cages. And that's not how we don't have to be that way. We are way better than that as human beings, and we're much stronger when we are in love with one another and not disposing of each other. So instead of criminalizing poverty and throwing folks in jail for things like urinating in public, and criminalizing mental illness and putting people in jail because they're addicts, instead of criminalizing things like not being able to pay my traffic ticket, we should use jail for only those worst offenses that people need a timeout to keep us safe. And for everything else, we need circles and systems of care to make our society the beloved community that it's meant to be. Thank you.